We have traveled around our state, visiting at least 80 of our 92 Indiana counties with at least one of our 20 or more different programs. Our conversation series extends our mission to educate the public about African American history and culture. We have some distinguished professors, educators, researchers, historians who have agreed to share with us a little bit of what they have known so that we can all be smarter and more intelligent human beings. And throughout the year, we're learning more about different things, people, places, and events in Indiana history. You can go to our webpage at freetownvillage.org to see more about the listings, a series in this session, of the sessions in this series, and other Freetown Village programs, including our fabulous summer day camp, which ends tomorrow. Our 7-week summer day camp, we're at Butler University all this week, and we're rounding it out tomorrow. Coming up in September, we'll have dates to confirm that. Since this is an election year, we have researched women's suffrage. You know, women play a very pivotal role in voting. And we have a play about that that really explains about some of the things that women have experienced, had to go through in order to receive the right to vote. And hopefully it'll inspire everyone to take part in our political procedures this year. For tonight, I want to thank our sponsors, the Black Heritage Preservation Program at Indiana Landmarks, the Indiana Humanities, IU Indianapolis Africana Studies Department, and the Joseph Taylor branch of ASALH. And ASALH stands for the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. And if you would like to support our 40+ years of educating the public, please help us to reach the next 1 million people, 1 million participants. We've already passed the 1 million mark. And your support will get us to the 2 million, the 3 million, the 5 million, the 10 million, who knows? Tonight, it is my honor to have Leon Bates as our next presenter. Leon is a U.S. historian of the Gilded Age and Progressive Era, the end of Reconstruction to the Great Depression. His research focuses on urban environment with interest in education, housing, infrastructure, labor, medicine, policing, police violence, and the intersection of race. He holds a BA in Africana Studies and History at IUPUI. I'm sure when that degree was granted, it was IUPUI. Yeah, and an MA in Pan-African Studies from the University of Louisville, and an MA in History from Wayne State University with a Graduate Studies Certificate in Archival Administration. Currently, he is a PhD student in the Department of Pan-African Studies at the University of Louisville. Leon is a veteran of the U.S. Army and an Indiana Army National Guard, where he served as both an enlisted and an officer. He's an aviation mechanic, nuclear, biological, and chemical warfare specialist. Who but him knows what that is? In addition, he holds a journeyman wireman's card with the IBEW with 25 years of experience, and holds both a master electrician and a commercial refrigeration license. After Leon's presentation, we will entertain questions from our audience here. And for those of you who are online, please drop your questions or comments in the chat, and we will respond to as many questions as time allows. And in order to continue to bring quality programs like this and the others, we really encourage you all to complete a short evaluation at the end of this program. And for those of you here in the audience, a QR code will appear on the screen. Those of you who are online, an email will be sent to you with a QR code, a link to respond to. Evaluations are the best way to measure our programs with our audience and to our funders, it's a good idea to know, what did you think about this? Some of you may have ideas that turn into other programming. And before Leon begins, we would like to share with you a short video about John Puryear, produced by Freetown Village for our Black History Moments series. And you can see it on the Freetown Village YouTube page, along with other videos researched by Eunice Trotter and produced by Freetown Village. At the conclusion of the video, you will hear from Leon Bates.
This is a little known Black History Moment brought to you by Freetown Village.
Driving in Indianapolis, chances are you will travel along Capitol Avenue. This major street got its name from John A. Puryear, one of the first African Americans to serve on the Indianapolis City Council. Puryear served on the council from 1892 until 1897. Puryear led efforts to change Tennessee Street to Capitol Avenue and Mississippi Street to Senate Avenue. Puryear wanted the street names changed because these were the names of slave states, and he had once been enslaved. A downtown Indianapolis street was given his name in 1895. Just 4 blocks long, Puryear Street is north of St. Joseph Street, where black families once lived. Puryear died in 1930 at age 75.
For more information about Freetown Village, visit us at freetownvillage.org.
Okay. Let me try and do this and not embarrass the family. Back it up one. If you are interested, if you scan that QR code with your phone, you can actually get the presentation. It'll come up on your phone and you can keep it. There's nothing top secret on there. Everything I got is, or I'll show tonight, is readily available. I'll just save you the trouble of looking for it. Okay, let's see. Oh, okay, sorry. Everybody ready? Okay, here we go. Greenlawn Cemetery. Greenlawn is over on the west side, the southwest side of Indianapolis, and I'll show you a map of where that was if you're not familiar with it. Greenlawn Cemetery is actually 4 cemeteries. The first one being the Bury Ground, the next one being the New Bury Ground, the third one being the North Bury Ground, and the last one being Greenlawn Park Cemetery. Sometime around the Civil War, they started calling all of them collectively Greenlawn Cemetery. but they're actually 4 cemeteries with 4 different histories and 4 different creation dates. I jumped ahead of myself. This is the talks about those cemeteries a little bit in the city of Indianapolis. Indianapolis is 403 square miles. There are 150 pioneer cemeteries in the city, in Marion County. Of those 150, Greenlawn is the largest of the 150. The others are probably all still around town. You can find them. Very few are still in use, but occasionally you will find one behind an old church that someone was buried in. Up until 1863, Greenlawn was the only cemetery in town. Well, about back up, it was the only public cemetery in town. 1863, Crown Hill opens. But in the 1850s, there were several cemeteries started, mainly on the south side. St. Joseph Cemetery, the Lutheran Cemetery, a couple others escaping my mind. But Greenlawn was it from 1821 until 1863. And in 1863, Crown Hill gets started. Also about Greenlawn Cemetery, something people should know and understand. Greenlawn Cemetery was segregated in Indianapolis, there in Marion County, Indianapolis. There is not an African-American cemetery. That's because the African-American section, or as was known then, the colored section, was in Greenlawn Cemetery. There was a segregated section in the old Bury Ground. And I'll show you a map that shows that here in a minute. Of those cemeteries, one thing to know is that there have been 4 mass exhumations of the graves at Greenlawn. There were 1,200 veterans taken out of the new Bury Ground in 1866. They went to Crown Hill Cemetery. Those are Union veterans. 1,200 early city residents taken out of the new Bury Ground to Crown Hill in 1911. A little over 2,000 taken out of the old Bury Ground to Floral Park, and 1,600 Confederates taken out of what was Greenlawn Park over to Crown Hill in 1931. That is the old Diamond Chain building most of you probably are familiar with. It's long gone now, but that building was sitting on top of the cemetery. When they tore that building down between Christmas and April, they found more than 100 human remains underneath the building. They are still doing the scientific analyzation of the remains to get a total count of how many individuals they have. Right now, I can tell you is that it's more than 100. That building totaled approximately 6 acres, the footprint of it. The cemetery itself is approximately 25 acres. This was out behind the cemetery. This image right here is the old Bury Ground, the first part of the cemetery, which actually started in 1821. Although they were burying people there before 1821, it officially goes on the map in 1821. This is what's proposed, or what was proposed to go on it. Right now, we don't know what's going to happen. The developer wanted to build something like this with a hotel and apartment space. You can kind of see the 11 there on top of the soccer stadium. It was an elaborate design, pretty bold, but that's what it was. We don't know what's going to happen. That glassy part right in the middle at the back of it, that's White River. We're looking west from downtown. Okay, getting into the history of it. This is an 1866 map of Indianapolis, actually Marion County, and it's on the Library of Congress website. And the reason I chose it is that it's got a lot of detail for a map that old. This is a section of that map. If you look in the upper right, you see Monument Circle. Just to the left, State Capitol. And if you look down to the lower left, you'll see Greenlawn Cemetery, Old Cemetery, Cemetery. That's Greenlawn Cemetery today. One thing I want to point out here is that you'll notice the numbers 135, 134, 133. Those are what's called outlot numbers, and they identify the lot by number. Notice that the old cemetery doesn't have one. There's a story behind that, but basically, those actually 4 areas make up Greenlawn Cemetery. The old cemetery is the old Bury Ground. 133 is the new Bury Ground. 134 is the North Bury Ground, sometimes called Peck Cemetery or Peck's Tract, and 135 is Greenlawn Park Cemetery. Here's just a bigger blow up of that same map, and it gives some of the details I was just giving. Whoops. Greenlawn, like I said, cemetery has been built on, built over. It has had many things done to it over the years. And what you have to understand is that at the same time this was happening in the 1850s, the parks movement was starting in the United States, going all across the country. The idea of building parks in inner cities, green space, larger parks. They created Central Park in New York, Rock Creek Park in Washington, D.C. Indianapolis has a network of parks along the waterways and boulevards in Indianapolis. That all starts in the 1850s. And it's part of the reason that Crown Hill is built, because they also started doing cemeteries the same way. You had the rural cemetery movement, which Crown Hill's a part of, moving cemeteries out of congested downtown areas. So that's part of the demise of Greenlawn Cemetery. One of the things that our city leaders decided was a good idea when they were looking for a new place to move the pest house was Greenlawn Cemetery. Pest house, for most people, have never heard of that. It is it's basically a leper colony. People who had tuberculosis and other communicable diseases that they couldn't cure were often kept in pest houses, and they were very unpleasant places. Where else could you put a pest house but on an abandoned cemetery no one wants to be near? The idea did not pan out, but it was floated. This is an image of what the Indianapolis pest house looked like. Also in Indianapolis, we have to understand that facilities were segregated. And if you look at that one, most everyone in that picture appears to be African-American. There's at least one little girl, maybe two, that appear to be very light complected or white. I'm not sure what's going on there, but look how close together those beds are. If you look up above their heads, you can see the rafters of the floor above. This is in a basement, and behind them are two large basement windows that are in window wells. So that's how they get their light and ventilation. And this was Indianapolis in 1902 when that photograph was taken. Also in 1902, we had grave robbing going on. And it caused a great scandal. And in 1906, Indiana rewrote its laws and made it illegal for hospitals, medical facilities, doctors, anyone to acquire a human body or a cadaver without state approval, without going through the state. Before that, people just bought them on their own, did their own thing. They actually went out and robbed graves. Greenlawn was one of the cemeteries that was robbed. I don't have much information about whether Crown Hill was done that way, but many of them in central Indiana were robbed and the human remains were never found. Also about Greenlawn with the African Americans, I put those names here. You may have heard of Cheney Lively. I misspelled that. Cheney Lively, Thomas Magruder, S. Kelly, I don't have a name for him, John Tucker. What's significant about those names? Cheney Lively was the first African-American property owner in Indianapolis. She came here with Alexander Ralston in 1820, and she was his housekeeper. Now, I don't know exactly what the relationship with those two were, but she stayed with him until he died in 1827. And then she later marries John Britton, an African-American barber here in town. Thomas Magruder is one of the people that when Harriet Beecher Stowe wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, she patterned that character after him, maybe a couple other people, but he's one of them. And that's where the name we believe Uncle Tom came from. Kelly, there is a documentary, I think it's on Netflix, and I'm blanking on the name. But anyway, it is about Zora Neale Hurston's book, Barracoon. And the book is where she interviewed in the 1920s or 1930s, the last known survivor of the Clotilda, the ship that was brought to the United States in 1860 with the last known imported slaves from Africa. And one of the men was a guy named Cudjoe Lewis. And Lewis tells his story of being born in Africa, and he's probably a teenager when he is captured, brought here, lives through slavery, emancipation, Reconstruction, and he dies in the 1930s. And I imagine when I found Kelly's name in the records that he has a story much like Lewis, but I couldn't find any information on him other than he claimed he was born in Africa. He would have been the right age. Everything about him seemed right, so I have no reason to doubt that that man probably was actually one of the late arriving slaves to the United States. John Tucker, if you don't know who he is, there is a historical marker at the corner of Illinois Street and Washington Street, right in front of the Panera Bread. John Tucker was lynched in downtown Indianapolis, July 4th, Independence Day, 1845. He was buried at Crown Hill. Oh, not Crown Hill, excuse me, Greenlawn. All of these people were buried at Greenlawn. To our knowledge, they are still there. They have not been moved. This is an image of another image of a map that shows Greenlawn. What I put it up here for is notice the railroads on it. And those railroads continue to grow. But that's what Indianapolis looked like. This is from a 1908 base atlas map that shows that area downtown. And it hasn't changed much since then. This is 1911 newspaper from Indianapolis. They're talking about Greenlawn Cemetery, and actually this is where they're going to actually sell this part of the cemetery off to Diamond Chain not long after this. E.J. Peck, Edward J. Peck, owned that part of the land, and he turned it into a cemetery. And when he turned the property over to the city of Indianapolis, he put a clause in it that said if that property was ever used for anything other than a cemetery, the city of Indianapolis had to give it back to him or his heirs. So when they announced putting the pest house over there and some of the other redevelopment, Peck's heirs approached the city of Indianapolis, got into a dispute, took them to court, and prevailed in court. So when they prevailed, they had to give that property back. That whole, I think that's outlot 135. They had to give that back to Peck's heirs. And with that said, the one catch that they had was that they were required to move all the remains out of Greenlawn Cemetery, or out of that Peck Cemetery exactly, to Crown Hill, which they did, air quotes, they moved them. But we're talking about a cemetery that was probably 7.5, 8 acres in size. And if you think about it for a second, you can bury, according to modern standards, 800 to 1,200 people per acre. So if we use simple math of 1,000, that's 8,000 people. But the records we could find at Crown Hill Cemetery do not total to 8,000 people. So somebody got left behind. And those somebodies are the 100 or so that the developer found in early 2024. This is a blow up of that photograph. That man sitting on that, what appears to be a tree stump, is actually carved marble. He claimed to have carved as a seat. He had his wife and 6 children buried there, so he would go to the cemetery quite often to visit them. We don't know what became of the family. He is buried at Crown Hill Cemetery. He wanted to be buried there, and they refused to allow it. This is another part of that same original photograph. What you're looking at is looking north, from north to south, along the very edge of the White River. And it's kind of hard to see, but the White River is to the center right of that photograph. There's what appears to be a house, almost the center of the photograph. That house is down at water level. Greenlawn Cemetery drops down about 12, almost 15 feet from where it is when you're walking around that cemetery down to water level. And there is, a flat spot down there today still, where you can sit up to fish or camp or whatever. These folks were poor people in Indianapolis, and they built 4 or 5 houses over here, and they called it a settlement in the city of Indianapolis. And these families feuded for several years before the city of Indianapolis finally got them out of there. This photograph was done in 1911 to show you how far back and how convoluted housing, economics, politics went in this city. This photograph was taken, I believe, around somewhere around 1911 to 1917, when the Diamond Chain Building was built, when Peck's heirs moved all those people to Crown Hill Cemetery, they didn't move them individually. They had them dug up and put them in large boxes and took them to Crown Hill and put them in a mass grave. So when you put somebody in a mass grave, you don't need grave markers. So the grave markers get piled up and left. When they were demolishing the building, these grave markers, not these, but other grave markers were unearthed. So they're right now sitting in a warehouse trying to decide what to do with them. What do you do with someone's grave marker? You can't take it over to Crown Hill and put it on the ground with them, because we don't know where those people are. They were mixed up in boxes. You got one person who's in several boxes, and there's several boxes in a mass grave together. It's just not practical. So what do we do with the grave markers? These folks buried in Indianapolis right now is wrestling with what do they do with these grave markers they've unearthed. But this is what it looked like just before the Diamond Chain Building was built. Some of you may have heard about the Confederate monument that was in Garfield Park. It was not a Confederate monument. It was actually a Confederate grave marker. If you look at it carefully, you see those dark brown squares at the bottom of it? Those are bronze plaques with the names of 1,616 Confederate soldiers who died in a prison camp in Indianapolis and were interred at Greenlawn Cemetery. The reason they did this, as opposed to giving individual grave markers, the records were in such poor condition and partial records had been destroyed that the federal government decided it would be appropriate and easier to build one mark, take the money for each individual marker, put it together, buy one big marker, put everyone's name on it. And that's what you see there. In 1928, the Southern Club of Indianapolis had this marker moved to Garfield Park because they said no one came over there on Decoration Day, which preceded, now we celebrate Memorial Day. And all of the best orators were going to Crown Hill because it looked better. It's what everybody was wanting to go to. So they convinced themselves and raised the money, moved to Garfield Park. City of Indianapolis Parks Department said, yes, you can move it there. That's how it got there. There were no Confederates buried at Garfield. They were all over here at Greenlawn. What I will tell you about that marker also is that that's the only record that we can find of African Americans being moved from Greenlawn. There are 12 African Americans whose names appear on those bronze plaques. They were not Confederate soldiers. They were camp servants, and they opted to stay with their enslaver rather than to be set free. The Union Army gave them opportunity to leave, and these men decided not to, and they died. Others left. They let them just walk out. You're free, you can go. They probably stayed because if they left and went home without Master Johnny, there would be hell to pay. Other family members would be mistreated. So they were afraid. So they stayed. They paid the price. But as I said a minute ago, these are the only 12 names of African Americans we know that were removed from Greenlawn Cemetery. This is a map from the Sanborn Fire Insurance set. Well, the reason I included this one, if you look in the lower left corner, you'll see that yellow looks like a angle there. That's the old Outlaw League baseball park stadium. They actually built a baseball stadium over there on this site. And this map comes from 1914. I think the league was already out of business by the time this map was drawn. I just go to show you what else has been put on that site.
Right up here. You know it's my birthday.
Sand was
No.
the lumber was salvaged and sold
No, it's my birthday.
for use someplace else.
Hey, jump on the baby.
Also, let me go back. The
Hey.
Southern Club said the reason they wanted to move that marker, if you see those houses in the back, that's a part of the old Gardner meat packing plant. Gardner owned those. And if you look at the very far right, you can see what appears to be a brick building. That's actually the Gardner slaughterhouse. We're not sure what Gardner did with these houses right here, but Gardner owned those. But the propaganda the Southern Club spread was that the Confederate cemetery is being encroached on by Negro cabins. That's what they're talking about. And those houses were not owned by African Americans. They were owned by the Gardner Slaughterhouse. Those buildings in pink right there, just below the big roundhouse, that's the Gardner Slaughterhouse. If you look real carefully, you'll see those 3 yellow houses below and to the right. Those are the same houses you saw. And that marker set just beyond that line where those 3 yellow houses are. Uh-oh. Houston, we have, oh, there we go. Okay, another image, and you can see here in this one how the railroads have grown. They have really expanded the number of railroads over. Another reason that the Southern Club wanted that marker moved was all the noise the railroads made. They would wake the dead, as some people would say. I threw this map in here just because it's easier to see. I got it from Indiana State Library. They found a better looking map, but this is the only part they say they actually put up. So I use this one. It's a lot more clear. You can see what's going on. You can see the diamond chain building in the center, that beige looking building. It's actually 2 of them. And later they tear the one in the back down. The one in front stays there and they add on to it. And it's sitting on lot 134. That is the Peck Cemetery. That's the one that they took the Union soldiers out of, and they took the early Indianapolis settlers out of that one. If you look to the below that, those 2 bright, long pink buildings, one of them, the lower one, the longer, bigger building, was the Union Traction Terminal warehouse. The Union Traction Company bought those 2 lots, those 2 large pieces of land, the old Bury Ground, the new Bury Ground, and then put their warehouse freight terminal on the building, on the ground. And in 1923, the state of Indiana actually wrote a law that let Indianapolis sell that 4 acres of land to the Union Traction Company. But the law had a caveat. It said if Indianapolis, when they got the land, did anything other than use it for a cemetery, Indianapolis had to move or cause the removal of all human remains. The Union Traction Company moved 2,000 plus people to New Crown Cemetery in 1924. That 4-acre site, remember again, 8 to 1,200 people per acre. We use simple math, 4,000 people. If you move 2,000 plus, what happened to the other 2,000? I am not saying they're there. I'm saying they're unaccounted for. So this becomes important when you think about the city of Indianapolis is now going to build a new bridge and a new Henry Street across that property just below that large freight terminal building. And Indianapolis has already said that before construction starts, they are going to do an archaeological remediation. They're going to go in there and look for any and everybody and get them out. The flip side is that the developer who owns most of that property has said in their own reports and their own planning that they'll move all those they find. Think about that for a minute. They're going to move everyone they find. If they don't find them, they're going to build on top of them. And they have no plans to actively look for people first. And I have pointed that out more than once, and my name is mud with the developer for saying it. You know, I'm out up trying to upset people and I'm spreading rumor and disinformation. I'm just saying what you said. You said you're going to move everyone you find. When you're doing your construction, if you find someone, you'll move them. That tells me that if you don't look, you will build on top of it. This is one of the reasons I believe the city of Indianapolis backed out of that deal. Just another map of the same situation we just saw a minute ago. And notice, like I said, at the bottom where it says base atlas, when you get home, if you type in that HTTPS on any of those, it will take you to the website where you can see that map for yourself. This is the law I just spoke about. Now, the reason that's important is that when Indiana became a state, the US government gave 4 square miles of territory in Indianapolis to the state of Indiana. Most of us have heard about the downtown mile square, north, south, east, and west street. That's 1 mile. There's 3 extra miles that surround it. And that bury ground that we've been talking about, where that traction terminal sits, that 4 acres, that's what they're talking about. That 4 acres, when the city, let me back up, it wasn't the city. People got Europeans, pioneers, settlers who came to Indiana, got here as early as 1800. People started to die. When they did, they went over on the riverbank and they started to bury people there. They just picked a spot. What else would you do? When the federal government gave them that 4 miles, it was inside that 4 miles. So that 4-acre site, the state of Indiana set aside to not be sold because the federal government gave them the 4 square miles to sell as individual lots to raise money for the state coffers. So to account for that 4 acres, the state of Indiana wrote a law saying it is a public cemetery. This is why anybody and everybody could be buried there. It didn't matter if you were black, white, if you were Catholic, or if you were Baptist or whatever, you could be buried in that cemetery, and you could be buried there at no cost. Someone just get a shovel, go out, dig a hole, and bury you. So in 1923, when the Traction Terminal Company is proposing to build this cemetery, it wants to buy the real estate. Indianapolis wants to sell it because Indianapolis doesn't want to be responsible for it. The problem becomes who actually owns it, the state or the city. So the state passed a law that we just saw that gives Indianapolis complete control. Lock, stock, and barrel. Indianapolis, it's yours. The state of Indiana has and wants nothing to do with it. Only caveat is, whatever you do with it, if you use it for anything but a cemetery, city of Indianapolis, you have to remove everyone. The developer's historical archaeological consultant didn't know this. I pointed it out in one of the meetings. And there again, I was condemned for doing it. And for about a week, almost 2 weeks, the city of Indianapolis and the developer were in a panic. What do? Is this law still in the books? Actually, it's not. In 1976, state of Indiana rewrote all of its laws. In paragraph 1, sentence 1, on page 1 of the new Indiana Code says, any laws written prior to 1976 are hereby repealed. They're done. All laws not written before 1976 are repealed. So that's how they repealed this law. This comes from an Indianapolis newspaper in 1925. After the supposed removal of people from, my back's killing me. After they supposedly moved everyone out of that cemetery, WPA workers were actually doing some work on the riverbank. And as I said, it's 12, 15 feet to grade. They were down at water level, digging sideways into the riverbank. They undermined a couple of graves and the graves collapsed on top of them. And most people did not know the story behind it. Here's the other half of that story. You see the man sitting there holding the skull and the other human remains. He worked for the Indiana Historical Society. He knew the story of the cemetery. He went over, collected the bones, and then gave the newspaper an account of that. Another reason I included this photograph, it's actually, you can get it online through any newspaper source you want, down to the library. It's now considered to be taboo to show human remains, to photograph them and distribute them this way. But I use this one because this is what you can actually find online. It's an old newspaper. The way they did things in 1925 are very different from what we do today. What they're going to do over there on that site when the city of Indianapolis does its thing is going to be very different from this. There will not be any photographing of remains and distributing the photographs. But this is what you ran into. That in 1925, people said they did not know the cemetery was there or had ever existed. And this man, who was a historian for the state of Indiana, explained the story. 1947, what you see there is what's known as a cast iron coffin, and it was developed by a man named Fisk. In 1947, those people standing around him are employees of the Diamond Chain Company. they were doing an expansion over there, and while they were excavating out, they found his coffin. The man's name was John Dustman. They found his coffin. The way they know who he is, you can barely see it, but right in the center, just below that oval piece, right about here, there is a silver nameplate, and his name's engraved on it. That's how they knew who he was. And we were able to figure out a little bit about John Dustman. He's now at Crown Hill Cemetery. That oval piece at the top you see right there is actually the door of the window. It pivots on a screw at the top. You can push it over and look through the window and see the person inside the coffin. Until these were made, you couldn't ship human remains cross country. That, once they get it bolted together, it's hermetically sealed. So no smell gets out, nothing gets in. You can ship human remains. It's very heavy, but you can ship them that way. In the 1860s, embalming was developed, and these kind of became unnecessary. It was somewhat expensive, but they were kind of common. They have others of those, or I should say they found others of those over there at Greenlawn in the last few months. One of them was hit by, let me back up. One of the ones they found was hit in 1917 when they were building the Diamond Chain building. And the reason they know that is that they hit it, they busted it, poured concrete, and there's now solid concrete inside that cast iron coffin surrounding the human remains. So when they built that building, those people knew they were building on top of people. That's just one example. That one was removed a few months ago. And we know that, like I said, it dates from that time period. This is an aerial photograph of the area downtown. This is kind of hard to see, but remember the photographs I showed you with the long buildings? Just to the left, that's White River, where it says Map Indy running down. That is the White River. And then to the right and down near that diagonal street of Kentucky Avenue is the old cemetery. And there you see those two long warehouses I was talking about. These photographs are from the 1960s, 1970s. There's a more closer view of it. You can see those two long warehouse buildings. Look carefully, you can see what appears to be trucks backed up to the building. There's a rail yard just below it. This is a later version of that. And you can see now that big white square in the middle, that was Diamond Chain's new warehouse that they built. And they unearthed more people building that. And the long warehouses are now gone, or most of it's gone. But look carefully at the riverbank. That riverbank is actually being excavated. There's an even better picture of it. You can see the tracks where the large equipment's driven down in there, and they've excavated down to the water level. No one can tell us what this was for. The aerial photographs captured it, and no one seems to know why that was dug up. We're not sure if or how far back into the cemetery they dug. There's no records of it. So if there were people there, and there are people who were washed out, let me say that also, should have mentioned that. Over the years, there have been human remains found as far south as Raymond Street that they believe washed out of Greenlawn Cemetery and were carried downriver in the spring floods. So they have found numerous bones. What you see here, whatever was left, if they dug back far enough, was dug out and hauled off. Here's another area where they're talking about digging that place up, finding remains. And the reason I included these, this is from 1980. They're still finding human remains over there in the 1980s. When I was a kid, my mom, who went to nursing school at then General Hospital, it's now Eskenazi Hospital, told me when she was in nursing school, they brought people in over to General Hospital. They brought human remains in that were unearthed over at Greenlawn Cemetery. So I've known about this all my life. I just never thought I would be talking about it like this today. But I can remember being in school and just after out of high school, and this happened. And they have found remains over there on that riverbank since 1924, when the last big redevelopment happened. This again is from 1980. These photographs were taken by employees of the Diamond Chain Company, and they were taking pictures of what they were unearthing. And you can see grave markers in different sizes. That one in the middle at the bottom, that's a metal handle off a coffin. The point I'm making is that they did not move people as they had promised they would do and should have done. And we've known it. And it was kind of frustrating for me and others to keep telling the city that this is what happened, because the deputy mayor and others did not know until we educated them. And they were shocked when we started telling these things and we started bringing this stuff out. That photograph there comes off of Google Earth. Weintraub and Associates, who was the historical archaeological consultant for Keystone Development, took that photograph and drew that red line around it. So if you look at it, that's the footprint of that cemetery. In the upper right is the Diamond Chain Building. Down to the just below it and to the left, that first large black square is part of the warehouse. That second large square is part of the other part of the warehouse that was developed over time. But from that going to the left, which is going west, it's all parking lot. Also, the cemetery, there's several buildings just below that red line, the bottom red line. Those buildings are built on top of the southern end of the cemetery. That's where some of the remains were found when those buildings were built. They were built in the 1980s. This is an artist rendering of what the cemetery, what the redevelopment would look like on that site, inside that red line that they drew up. This was just one of their ideas. Like I said, apartments, parking garage, retail space, office space, hotel. This is another drawing of it. And like I said, it's a 25-acre site, or what at the time we were told was a 25-acre site. So think about this for a minute. I just talked about 8 to 1,200 people per acre, 25 acres, that's 25,000 people. We have records of less than 10,000 people that we know were moved. 15,000 are unaccounted for. I am not saying they're there. I'm saying they're unaccounted for. The only proper, humane way to do this is to go in there first and archaeologically excavate that site to see who and what is there and get it out. The contractor's plan, as I said earlier, is to start construction and remove anybody they find. If you think back a few weeks ago, the city of Indianapolis was using a number of 650 people per acre they believe are still there. You get that 650 if you use the number 23 as 23 acres and divide that 23 acres, or divide 15,000 by 23 acres, and you get 650. So that's just an average number that the bean counters of the city are using to try to get their arms around what this really means and what it's going to look like. There could be 650, there could be 950. We don't know. They don't know, and they will admit that now. But that's what you're looking at. This is the artist's rendition of what it would look like looking from the west to the east. You see the football stadium there. You see the AUL building and other tall buildings downtown. Of course, there at the bottom on the left is the White River. Now, they cleaned that riverbank up real nice in this photograph. It doesn't look nowhere near that good if you go over there today. Don't believe the hype of this photograph. But that's what it could look like. And that bridge is going to be built. The city of Indianapolis has already said they will build that bridge. That was agreed to several years ago. And the city of Indianapolis has said, if you look at basically from where that first ring starts, that's on the east bank of the river, and you look to the right to Kentucky Avenue, the city of Indianapolis said that's basically 1.5 acres. So they're figuring they're going to find 650 or more people when they do this. But that's what they're going to do before construction starts. That bridge is going to happen. This other development, we don't know what's going to happen to that. That's up in the air. The city of Indianapolis has said they will not fund the development of that stadium. The city of Indianapolis wants to turn this into a park or memorial garden or something along that line. The developer still wants to build. There again, here's another image of that bridge. And the other part of this story is on the west side of that river where Elanco's building their world headquarters. Elanco and Indiana Development Corporation, whatever Sam Hickett's called, IEDC, they want this elaborate bridge with these hoops and things like this on it. City of Indianapolis finally said, we don't have the money. Well, they found a private donor who gave them the money to put the rings on it. So it will get the rings. It will also have a walking bicycle trail on it. So only half the bridge is going to be for automobiles. The rest is going to be for pedestrians and bicyclists and things like that. This is part of the development plan that I copied out of it. If you notice at the bottom on the left, there's Joe Hogsett's signature, October 21st, 2021. That shows you how long they've been working on this. It didn't just start yesterday. These are some of the points that we have been raising over the last year and a half, almost 2 years now, talking about this. The completion has shifted and changed several times. One of the things they said they did on the site was to do test boring. They did 2 test borings, 100, 150 feet, and they didn't find any remains. What does that tell you? You did 2 test borings, 8-inch in diameter, in a 25-acre site, and you didn't find anything? That's kind of meaningless. Other thing you need to understand is that Greenlawn is considered to be an abandoned cemetery. In other words, if you go over to it, all above ground references have been removed. All grave markers, all statuary, anything that would let you know that it was a cemetery been removed. So therefore, it can be treated a little bit differently. If you go to a cemetery and you find grave markers, you cannot dig. That's not allowed. If you want to dig in it, then you have to go through a process with the state of Indiana to come up with a plan of how you're going to do it, moving the remains and all those kind of things. If there's no markers, then you're allowed to dig until you find remains. Then there's a process the state will put you through as to what the next steps will be. And that's where the developer is right now. They have found more than 100 sets of remains, and the state of Indiana has called timeout, timeout. No, you can't keep digging like that. You're going to have to come up with a better plan, basically pushing them toward what the city of Indianapolis is saying. You got to go in there and excavate before you actually start construction. The estimates on that are kind of, they're extreme, but the best guess right now is $80 to $100 million just to get the people out before you start construction. That is a big number. That's one of the numbers I think is frightening the city of Indianapolis. They don't want to go down this road. The city would rather just buy it, plant grass, as I said 2 years ago, call it a day. The developer wants to build. The state of Indiana is now pushing them like, if you want to build, you got to move the people. 80 to 100 million. To give you an example of how that number is arrived at, in 2018, the Indianapolis Airport Authority moved the Bethel Methodist Cemetery out on the airport, right there by FedEx. They started out thinking it was 200 and some people. They ended up, it was 540 plus. It's a 0.8 acre site, so it's a little less than 1 acre. It cost $2.5 million and took almost a year to complete. About 3-4 months of active work in the field to get the people out, a month or so to get prepared, and then 6 months to do the paperwork when it was done to close the job out. And they just published a 3,500-page report on that cemetery for 1 acre and 500 people. Can you imagine what it's going to look like for a 25-acre site and maybe 15,000 or whatever that number is going to be? So if you extrapolate out 2.5 million for 1 acre and put that into 25 acres, you come up close to $80 million before you even get started. Now you have to allow a little bit for inflation and other things. So it could be $100 million. That's not hyperbole. There will be a historical marker on that site now. probably somewhere near that bridge. I got this approved in October 2023. The state has agreed to put the marker up. Now all we have to do is figure out where to put it. There is a lot of conversation about doing more than just a historical marker. It's a kind of, and I don't know what that would be. I'm not an artistic type person. I'm not a creative type. You know, I'm a mechanical guy. I'm an electrician. I'm also a historian, you know, and I read, but creativity is not my strong suit. So when they get on this process, which is going to start soon, if you have ideas, speak up, because they're trying to figure that out right now, just for the bridge part of it, and trying to encourage the developer to change his mind. You can go to that website and you can listen to myself and the deputy mayor talking about this on a radio show a few months ago. You can hear more about it, and we're addressing the same kind of issues. If you go to this website, and you may have to pay to see it, it's a great video. It explains the history of cast iron coffins and accidental discoveries of human remains. It's a 1-hour PBS documentary. It's very informative. I would highly recommend it. Like I said, maybe behind a paywall, but that concludes my prattling on about Greenlawn Cemetery. I hope it was informative. Please ask questions, because I know I did not cover everything. So please. Thank you. I'm sorry. I think so. Well. Yes, ma'am. Can you run the slides back to that very first blue screen with the QR code on it? Okay, thank you.
And for those who have questions, we'll have to speak into the mic because we have the online people need to hear what you're saying.
My question is, as the city is developing the Henry Street Bridge, and that little section, I guess, would be to the south of it, that little section of cemetery. So the plan is they will remove all of the remains from that little corner.
Yes, ma'am. They're across the very southern border
Mhm.
of that site, about 100 feet wide. And from the river to Kentucky Avenue is going to be the new Henry Street.
Uh-huh.
And that's what Indianapolis is actually going to be working on. And they have already said, they promised the first thing we're going to, in fact, I know it's more than promise. I even know who the contractor is who's going to do the removal of human remains. They've already hired him. They're going to look for and remove everybody they can find before they start. And that's the most that you can ever ask, is at least go and give it a good faith try.
Mhm.
And that's what City of Indianapolis has said they're going to do.
So the rest of
The rest of the site
is owned by Keystone Group.
is owned by Keystone Development.
So
And
there's no way that like we would ever get, like, if you go down to New Harmony, there's this big green space. There are no gravestones in it. It's like fenced in, and it says, this is where the early settlers of New Harmony rest. And it's very peaceful in there. Anybody can walk on it. That doesn't look like it's going to happen to any of this.
we don't know.
We don't know.
We
Yeah.
just don't know. Now, you bring up New Harmony. I have not been to that site, but one I have seen is in New York City, just north of Battery Park, but south of Wall Street,
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
the African burial ground. For those who don't know what I'm talking about, you can look it up. Just type in African Burial Ground NYC. It'll come up. It is a 1-acre site. It is the smallest U.S. park in the United States at 1 acre. There are more than 400 African, when I say African, I mean Native Africans, who were brought here as slaves and buried on that site.
Mhm.
And the federal government was building a new office building when they discovered onto it, and then stopped. And after a lot of back and forth and emotional discussions, the federal government decided that they would modify their building to accommodate that 1 acre cemetery. And then they turned it into a memorial park with signage, and there is a walkway you can go through there. And on the first floor of that government building, there is a a center, an information center. You can walk in and there's 2 or 3 park rangers who work there that will explain to you the history of the park and what it all means. So that is one example of how it can be done. The New Harmony site you're talking about is another way it can be done. But
Or any like Quaker cemetery where they're unmarked, right? It's just a peaceful green
yes,
and
yes,
yeah, anyway.
but there's been no commitment from the developer to do that.
Leon, I have a question about the level of the river. Over the century, has the level gone, is it higher? And how is that affecting the amount of people that they're able to find?
The river level probably naturally has eroded down some, so it's gone down, but the White River averages around 5 foot deep year round. And I could walk across it and my feet would touch the bottom. But with that said, there's pockets, there's holes in the bottom, things like that. The problem becomes in the spring when we have a lot of storms and you have the runoff, that causes the erosion of the bank. And that is how people got washed out. They were buried real close to the river. We don't know who those people were and we don't know how many were there or if they got washed out. There's just no records. That 4-acre site was a public site. There were no records kept, no anything. The site north of it, Greenlawn Park, comes in much later. It doesn't start till the 1860s. And they moved some of the Confederate veterans the first time to the south so they could sell part of that land off to the railroad. But to my knowledge, I don't think anybody was buried in that section all the way up to the river. So probably most of the people got washed out came out of that first section of that bury ground section. Also, when I said it was segregated, we don't know this for sure. We know it was segregated. We have found that in several Indianapolis histories and in several newspapers, but they don't tell us where or how it was segregated. So we don't know if the African Americans were buried next to the river or buried to the south. There's a lot of strange beliefs in cemeteries and burials. And some people believe when you bury someone, you bury them with their feet pointed to the west or to the east, so that the rising sun comes up on them. Some people believe you bury them with their feet pointing to the east, so that the Redeemer, Jesus, is going to come out of the east and they can set up to see him. So if that be the case, then the African Americans were probably buried to the west of them along that river. But if they didn't bury them that way, I didn't point it out, but in those maps, if you go back and look at them, there is a pathway that goes from north to a corner and then to the west to the river. And it suggests that the main gate was on the north side of that cemetery, which there again suggests the whites would have been buried on the north end in the front. The African Americans, the black folks, are buried to the back, to the south end. So we just don't know exactly where they are. We know it was segregated, but we don't know how. And there's no map to show that. Maps were not drawn of it. No records were kept because the property was not being sold. There's just nothing.
Leon, I have a couple of questions from our online chat.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you know if the Diamond Chain Company was ever fined or held accountable in any way for knowingly building over human remains?
Not to my knowledge.
All right. And there were numerous people over the last 20 years that were homeless camped behind Diamond Chain. Were there ever any reports from that community about discovering human remains?
Of the homeless folks?
Yes.
I don't know. I can tell you that one of the reasons the city of Indianapolis wanted that cemetery closed and was eager to sell it in the 1920s was that there had been numerous muggings either in the cemetery or near the cemetery and a couple of murders. The city wanted to be rid of it. And when the Traction Terminal Company wanted to buy it, they sold it. And they said part of the problem was there were many unmarked graves in there. They didn't know who was where in anything like that. But something, and this goes back to the black section, is that you will go into a lot of black cemeteries in this country and you won't find what you think of as a grave marker. Africans didn't do that. They often planted a tree or some kind of a plant on a grave, or they put something personal on the grave. It could be a personal possession, or they may have put a collection of rocks to outline the grave. There are all kinds of things they did. But what you think of today as a modern grave marker with engravings on it, we didn't do that. At the same time, you have to understand that from the time the slaves were brought to the United States until after 1863, it's not 1865, when the Civil War ends and emancipation comes. When emancipation comes, there are almost 4 million enslaved Africans in the South. There are only 400,000 free people of color in the North. So you will find in the North some African-American burials with grave markers. But in the South, you'll find a lot of unmarked graves. It is very common. One, you weren't allowed to do it. Two, you didn't have the money to do it. Three, it was not necessarily your tradition to use or create some type of a grave marker we would understand. So we just don't know how many people were buried that way. And it still happens today that some families, because they don't have the money, or they just don't see the necessity, buying a grave marker still may not mark a grave. And there are whites that are buried without grave markers. This is not just a black thing.
Hi, Leon. Do you know if there was any newspaper accounts following the flood during the 1913s, and if it had any impact, or if there was any reporting of bodies,
I don't know about the actually newspaper accounts after any of the different
after the
floods,
flood,
but
or
what I
during the flood, anything associated with the flood, and if it impacted.
well,
the
what I do know
cemetery.
is that Indiana Department of Natural Resources, the Division of Historic Preservation and Archaeology, who oversees all cemeteries in Indiana, has numerous reports of remains being found and then being reinterred somewhere else or being disposed of in some kind of way. I don't know how that happened, but there are accounts that DNR has in their possession of human remains being found in and along that river as far south as Raymond Street. Down to Raymond Street is where the city dump is, and the trash incinerator. That's a couple of miles from the cemetery, and they do have records of that. Also, DNR is responsible for all of these things, but DNR, can only enforce the laws that are there. And we didn't have laws to protect cemeteries until after the Second World War. I guess we just thought it wasn't necessary until developers decided they saw a piece of ground they wanted and started unearthing people. And what's happening at Greenlawn is not unique. It's all over the country. Cemeteries, especially black cemeteries, are being built over and paved over. Sometimes knowingly, sometimes no one pays any attention. In the Washington Post about a year and a half ago, there was a case where there were 2 small black cemeteries in Georgetown, which is a suburb of Washington, D.C. And they found, let me back up. In that suburb, there were 2 small black cemeteries. They were building a trail, bike and walking trail, and it went across the end of these 2 cemeteries. And some lady, just like anybody here in this room, knew the story, and she went out and asked the guys what they're doing. They told her, and she said, you're burying on top of a cemetery? And one of the people said, no. He says, no cemetery on the map or the instructions they had, and they were not on the map. But when she finally got a hold of somebody in the Department of Interior and then through the Park Service and other folks, and got a hold of some county maps that actually showed those cemeteries, the federal government stopped that trail project. So that's just one of them. When I say they stopped the construction and moved the trail, get it off the cemetery. And then they put it on the federal map, so now everybody knows it's there. But that was because some person raised a stink about it and pointed out that they were really doing something wrong. Currently down in Florida, there on 60 Minutes, if you go look at their archive, there's a school in some small town there that the school sits on top of a black cemetery. It happens. And in some of it's happening now, and others, will happen in the future.
I have a question, Leo.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You get to hand up, Brian. My apologies.
I know there are a number of genealogists doing research in the African-American families
Mhm.
that were potentially in there. I was wondering, there were a lot of African-American church congregations in that area all around there. Has anything like that turned up in like the minutes or any of the records of those old churches?
I haven't had a chance to actually look at those kind of records. I'm starting to talk to people about that. There were a handful of churches in Indianapolis before 1863. After 1863, the number goes up significantly. There were at least 3 African-American churches here prior to the end of the Civil War. That was Bethel AME, Second Baptist, and Allen Chapel AME. Allen Chapel starts in 1865, 66. Bethel starts in 1836, and Second Baptist starts around 1850. There are some other black churches that come along, and those 3 churches are still around. They are still here today. So as Ron's pointing out, they may have records. We just haven't had a chance to look at those. There is probably an equal number that came between 1865 and 1880 or so, and then the numbers grow up. There are white churches that we've been in contact with. For example, Christ Church Cathedral on the Circle. They told us we have records that go back to the 1830s. We know we have members who were buried at Greenlawn. We don't know if they were moved or not. And because the records are so bad, we may never know. But using those church records, as he's pointing out, we can at least start to develop a list of who was buried there. You have to also understand Indiana and U.S. history. The Irish started to come to the United States and eventually Indianapolis in the 1840s. The Great Famine starts in 1845, and about 1846, 47, large numbers of Irish start to hit the East Coast and then start moving to this part of the country. There is a revolution in Germany in 1847, 1848, and a number of Germans leave and come to this part of the country. One of the reasons they come to Indianapolis in the 1840s, the railroad arrived in the fall of 1847. So between 1821 and 1847, Indianapolis was on the frontier. The only way here was on foot, on horseback, or on a rickety wagon, and it'd be like sitting on this thing right here. There's no padding. Every time that wagon wheel hit a rock or a rut, you felt it. That was the only way into Indianapolis until 1847 when the railroad got here. People who were the more well-heeled travelers rode a stagecoach that took almost 2 weeks to go from Jeffersonville to Indianapolis. They kept stopping along the way to rest the horses and change horses, and they would spend the night in an inn, and it took almost 2 weeks. We get in a car right now, and it's 2 hours, depending on how fast you drive, maybe a little less, to Louisville. But it took almost 2 weeks to get here. So when the railroad got here, Indianapolis changed after 1847. So waves of people start coming in. Those folks were buried at Greenlawn as well. You don't get the German cemetery, the Lutheran cemetery, the Irish Catholic cemetery until the 1850s. So where were those folks buried? At Greenlawn Cemetery. The Jewish cemetery doesn't start till the 1850s. So it's not just a black thing. It's not just, a white thing. We have all different backgrounds potentially at that cemetery that are unaccounted for. We just don't know where they are. Over the years, when they have done work, they have found at least 5 members of the United States Colored Troops, USCT, That's the United States colored troops. Indiana had the 28th USCT. There were around 3,000 of them that fought in the Civil War at Petersburg. At least 5 of those men were discovered buried at Greenlawn, and they've now been moved someplace else. So we don't know. I mean, there are potentially men who fought in the American Revolution who were given land in central Indiana because the federal government did not have money to pay them for their service. Rather than give them money, they gave them land. And those Revolutionary War veterans came to Indiana, and many of them were buried at Greenlawn.
Hi, next. Oh,
Go ahead.
next question right over here. Thanks for the presentation. It was very informative. I'm sure other cities have faced similar challenges in wanting to develop on former cemetery sites. And so in your research, have you come across other cities who have dealt with this ethically and successfully, or are currently working on it in a way that we could use as a model for Indianapolis?
The best model, like I said, is the African Cemetery in New York. There is a website called the Black Cemetery Network, I think it is. If you Google that, there's a list of cemeteries on that site that are specifically Black cemeteries. And now Greenlawn has been added to it because of that Black section. But there are cities all over the country, and most of those cemeteries on there are endangered in one way or another. So yes, there are other cities going through this. They've all had different outcomes. There's one in Virginia that the state of Virginia built a highway over top of it. They built an interstate right over top of it. Didn't move anybody.
Hi, thank you, Leon, and then also thank you, Freetown, and for the Indiana Landmarks. My name's Beverly Kahn, and I actually live in the Babe Denny area, which
Okay.
is where
Just south of that.
that community is. And I do know that there are the 2 churches that are there. There's a Bethesda Baptist Church,
And with South Calvary, I think it
and then
is.
South Calvary is there. And I know they started in 1875.
Yeah.
So I don't know, if you've had any connections or
We haven't-
something with them.
We
Okay,
haven't had a
but-
chance to reach out to them. They're one of the churches on the list. South Calvary is. The other one was a new name to me. But like I said,
Bethesda, yeah.
Bethesda's a
So,
new
but
name.
I do know both of the pastors there.
Okay.
Also, as you were talking about that, there may be other, cultures and nationalities there, because that underneath Lucas Oil Stadium is that Arab community that was also there. So those could be some ways we could see.
They could be there as well. One of the things I learned in this process is that many of the Arab Americans were for some reason buried in Catholic cemeteries, and I don't know the exact story behind that, but they said you can find a number of them in a Catholic cemetery. But that's not to say that some of them could not have been buried at Greenlawn. They start coming to this part of the country around the 1850s, about the time the other cemeteries started being built. And I have not seen an Arabic name, but then again, if you look at, like, you were talking about the marker that just got put up where the stadium is, those Syrians, many of them don't have names that we would associate with being Arab. So there again, we may not realize who they are. And most of the people I'm talking about in this room don't know their family history back that far. I know in my case, my mom's family came from Tennessee. My dad's family came from Michigan. So I don't have any direct descendants or relatives in that cemetery. But many people in this room do. If they start digging back, they will find an ancestor or two that was either buried there or buried and moved.
Okay, Leon, I've got a couple of quick questions from online.
Okay.
To your knowledge, has anyone conducted research work to determine whether or not burials or burial areas may have been arranged by family units or neighborhoods, for instance, Hallville families, Ransom Place families, etc.?
Not like that. What happened is when the other 3 cemetery sections were opened and started to actually sell plots, this is another thing that I should have pointed out. Like I said, it was free to be buried in the old bury ground, but the other 3, you had to buy graves. So those three cemeteries are segregated by class, by money, not necessarily by race. There are African Americans buried in all four sections of that cemetery, but there it was by class. There are whites who were buried in the old bury ground after the new cemetery started, who were poor and didn't have the money. So their families buried them in the old bury ground. So they could be intermixed in there. We just, again, just don't know. But when people were buying the graves, they bought them individually, and sometimes they bought family plots. So there are records, like in the PEC section, of families buying multiple graves together. That did happen, but you know, by neighborhoods and things like that, I don't know.
Another question. I've seen reference to people, in particular Moses Magruder, buried in Craigellow's vault in 1876 because the family didn't trust his remains to be above ground. Can you tell me more about Craigellow's vault?
The vaults typically were used when people died in the wintertime and the ground was frozen. They were put in a vault and stored there until the ground thawed and they could dig the grave and then bury them. That was problematic when we had diseases spread through, what am I trying to think of? I'm sorry? Yeah, but I mean, when you have an outbreak of a disease, pandemic, epidemic, thank you. When epidemics happened, the vaults were overflowing, and then sometimes they did ad hoc things like use warehouses and barns, everything else, to just stack the coffins in because the ground was frozen solid, and they dug graves by hand. So that's what the crypts were used for. They would put people in the crypt and wait for the ground to thaw out. There were unscrupulous cemetery operators who buried one person on top of another. That was a common practice in the 19th century. There were unscrupulous undertakers or funeral home operators, who would take the remains out to the cemetery and put them in the crypt and then walk away, or in the vault, excuse me, and walk away. And several times the city had to go out to the old bury ground where the vaults were and get these remains out and bury them because the undertaker didn't pay the grave digger. They just stuck them in and walked off. So now it's much better, the way they're run today than what they were run. There are even cases in the 19th century where they had buried 4 and 5 people in a grave, and now you had maybe 1 or 2 coffins above ground, and they mounded dirt or earth over top of the coffins. So when you looked out across the cemetery, you didn't see it sunken in where a grave had collapsed. They were humped up like this. And it was a common practice in the 19th century. You don't see that in Crown Hill because that's one of the things that the rural cemetery movement moved away from. And without regulation, they started burying people the way we understand it today. But before that, people were unscrupulous in how they handled that.
All right, do we have one more question? And we're going to have to close it off. But those of you who are here, you can stay around and talk to Leon until he stops talking. Those of you who are in the chat, you can still send in the question. We'll try to get a response back to you, but we're going to let everybody have the freedom to go home. One more question. Oh, you can take it over there. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Bates. I'm one of those people. D.D. Davis found a deed
Okay.
for my family's plot in Greenlawn,
Okay.
but I'm not sure if anyone is ever actually buried there because they bought a plot at Crown Hill in 1870, and most of the people that are in the family can be accounted for in Greenlawn or in Crown Hill. I just wonder if you have, or if there are any records that show what the body count would be between 1821 and say 1870, that we would have any idea.
The one record that I'm familiar with is the Marion County mortality schedule, and it runs from 1871 to 1881. And it has all of the deaths in Marion County in that. And I think it's what, 10,000 or so entries in that, and 1,500 or so are African American. But there's limited information you can find. In fact, that record is where I found S. Kelly's name, was looking through that one. So I can't guarantee that record is totally accurate. The state of Indiana didn't require death records until late in the 19th century. So a lot of this happened and, people didn't know. The first burial that I found recorded in Greenlawn was in 1811. Indiana doesn't become a state to 1816. So someone after Greenlawn was established went back and bought a gravestone for a 2-month-old child and put it in over there. And that's the earliest one I've seen is 1811. And we don't know, other than it gives her first name and her parents' initials, we have no idea who that child is. I don't know. It just gives, and I don't think the last name was, or last initial was an M, so I don't think it's a McCormick, no. But it gave her first name and her parents' first and last initial. That's all you get.
All right, thank you, Leon. That was very interesting. I'm sure we all learned a lot. I thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank our sponsors again. Well, Eunice Trotter, she just stepped out. I was going to call her out. The Black Heritage Preservation Program at Indiana Landmarks, the Indiana Humanities, IU, Indianapolis Africana Studies Department, the Joseph Taylor Branch of Asylum, and the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Check our webpage at freetownvillage.org to learn about other Freetown Village programs and events, and join us for our next series of conversations on Thursday, August the 15th, here at Landmarks. Cleet Ladd will be talking about the Negro Baseball League and the historic Frederick Douglass Little League. That should be very interesting. Also, keep your eyes and ears posted. Look on our website for our upcoming production of Sign of the Times about women's suffrage. Very interesting program that'll be posted. Do not forget, since you got your phone out, to scan that code and complete the evaluation. Please scan that code and complete the evaluation. That will help us out a lot. Let us know what you think. Thank you and good evening.